You are listening to a pleasure podcast. For more from our Sex Podcast Collective, visit pleasurepodcasts.com.
Hey privates, I want to tell you about another podcast that I love and I think you're going to too. It's called the Multiamory Podcast, and it is another awesome show on the Pleasure Podcast Network. And the Multiamory Podcast is all about exploring the ins and outs of non-traditional relationships. Whether you're curious about polyamory, open relationships, or you just want to approach your monogamous relationship a little bit more intentionally, the Multiamory Podcast has got you covered. But what really sets this show apart is its commitment to providing research-backed relationship advice and communication tools that apply to all communication styles. The hosts, Dedeker, Emily, and Jace, are dedicated to helping their listeners build and maintain healthy, fulfilling relationships, and they have got the expertise to back it up. From tackling jealousy and setting boundaries to fostering inclusive, compassionate communities, the Multiamory Podcast covers all the topics you need to know to build successful, healthy relationships. So if you're looking to explore a new way of loving and want to improve your communication skills, or just want to deepen your understanding of ethical non-monogamy, I highly recommend giving the Multiamory Podcast a listen. So now I'm going to play a short clip from Multiamory episode 394. It's called 50 Ways to Handle Jealousy. And it's the beginning of a full 2-part discussion of 50 different personal tools and techniques for having a better relationship to jealousy, which I think we all could use, right? And in this clip, they cover just the first 4 tools, but I'm hoping it excites you enough to go check out the full episodes. And these are episodes 394 and 395 of the Multiamory Podcast. You can learn all about the show at multiamory.com or just search Multiamory wherever you listen to podcasts. So here we go.
On this episode of the Multiamory Podcast, we're talking about 50 ways to handle jealousy. This is the question that pretty much every polyamorous or non-monogamous person gets asked. How do you deal with the jealousy? And this is not even unique to non-monogamy or polyamory at all. Jealousy can come up in monogamous relationships, even in friendships or any number of different relationships. But we do always tend to get the question if we're non-monogamous.
So when I wrote this episode, and specifically the title of this episode, I was very intentional with my choice of words of calling it 50 ways to handle jealousy. So not cope with jealousy, not manage your jealousy, not tame your jealousy, not deal with your jealousy. I suppose that in my mind, I wanted it to be a little bit more positive, like animal handling. You know, we handle the animal. We're gentle. And we're compassionate, but we're also in control at the same time.
I do have proficiency in animal handling, so that's great.
Yeah, right? Put a lot of points into that. So that's the image that I wanted for all of these things, is that this isn't about trying to crush it or trying to cram it into a little box or trying to find the pill that I'm going to take that's going to eliminate and cure all of my jealousy. It's about handling it.
I think it's interesting that you say the word control as well, because when you're in really heightened emotional moments, that control sometimes feels like the first thing to go out the window. Your cognition is low. Your ability to put yourself back into one piece is low. And I think that's why episodes like this are so important, because it can be difficult to know like which tool to grab. And if you have 50 at your disposal, not that you're going to take every single tool that we give you, but the ones that really resonate with you, I think it's important to be able to go and say, okay, I'm going to try this, see how it works, because I want to be able to get back to a place of not feeling such intense emotion that causes me to potentially react in a negative way or feel really awful for a longer period of time. It can bring us back to that moment of peace and control and being able to feel good again in the moment. So we divided this big list of 50 into 4 different sections. First, we're going to do tools for your brain. Second, we're going to do tools for your body. Third, tools for your relationships. And fourth, tools for your heart and soul.
So, without further ado, let's get into talking about tools for your brain. So these are specific tools for if you're someone where your feelings of jealousy tend to be very cognitive. So they can manifest as repetitive thoughts, intrusive thoughts, thought spiraling, inability to focus on anything else. So if that's you, you might consider trying some of these things. So tool number 1, I highly recommend writing out your toolkit ahead of time. So what that looks like is when you're not in a moment of intense feelings or intense jealousy, taking the time to sit down and write out what are the things that do tend to help me when I'm feeling intense emotions, right? Or you could just save this podcast episode or consult the transcript, right? Something that I've done in the past is also categorizing my own personal tools, including okay, these are kind of my own ground rules for my own behavior. These are the tools that I know tend to work for me. And then these are the break glass in case of emergency. I'm really freaking out. And these are the things that I can turn to. Again, having this written down and accessible ahead of time so that when emotions are high and cognition is low, you have something else to turn to. You're not relying just on your own power to whip out something and make a decision about what you're going to do and what's going to help you.
Yeah, being proactive instead of reactive is always so helpful. Number 2 is to do a journal dump. And y'all know that I like to talk about journaling a lot. Because for me, when I get caught up in those thoughts, they're just, going around and around and around in my mind. And sometimes I'm not even totally aware of what they are because they're just kind of cycling in the background. And so doing journaling where you're just writing down whatever's in your head. There's not really a structure or a goal to it. It's more stream of consciousness or train of thought. It could be writing as if you're explaining it to someone else. It could just be notes for yourself. Whatever it is, just the point is that you're putting it down on paper. And I find it's best to write it by hand, although if for you typing or something like that works better, that's certainly helpful too.
Number 3 is mind mapping. This is something I believe we've talked about in previous episodes, and it's kind of similar to journaling. So mind mapping can kind of help you to map out in an artistic fashion, linearly, what is going on in your brain. And it doesn't even need to be linear. It can just be whatever the heck is going on. Draw something that feels angry, draw something that exposes, what happened to you in the past that may be leading you in a certain direction with what's happening at this particular moment in time. It can be whatever.
There's also, because mind mapping is something that's used in project planning or life organization, there's also a lot of apps out there for doing this where you basically have all the different bubbles that you put text in and connect them with lines. That's essentially what the mind map is in that way. There's also a fun VR one I played with where you actually with your VR goggles on can place items and then you speak and it does the microphone to transcribe and then you can link them up and kind of walk around through your mind map. That's maybe a bit overboard, but hey, it might help distract you from what you're worried about if you're trying to build your VR mind map.
Wow.
So tool number 4 is called Just the Facts, ma'am, sir, non-gender specific
person,
honorable title person. So, and this can be a journaling prompt as well. And it's writing out what the situation is with 0 value judgments, writing it out the way a reporter or a scientist might. So this exercise helps to discourage you from any catastrophizing that you may want to put into the situation, any coloring with your own emotions, the sense of they're totally, they're going to leave me, or I'm horrible and unlovable. It's literally just writing out what is happening. And that may not fix all of your emotions about it, but it can help to create a little bit of distance and maybe even make the situation seem a little bit less big and overwhelming.
This is something my therapist does a lot with me. Because our emotions color our perception so much, and we may be feeling really down on ourselves, and then therefore we spit out a thing that we think is a fact, and it in fact isn't. It's just our perception of maybe the situation that occurred. And I love the idea of really getting very granular and writing down facts about something and seeing, oh, okay, actually, did they ever say this thing about me? Have they ever, noted that they dislike this thing about me in the past or whatever? Or, if it's a jealousy situation, did they ever say that this person was better at this thing than I am? Not necessarily. So, yeah, that kind of helps to alleviate all of those stresses potentially.
Yeah, I do like that. I definitely had a therapist who would do that a lot to me when I would be worried about performances. Like if I played a show or something, I'd be like, I think everyone disliked it. And she'd say, did they tell you that? Like, how do you know that? And kind of would point out, like, I don't actually have evidence for it. I was just worried. But yeah, it was definitely helpful. Number 5 on our list here is called the unique list. And so this is to write down all of the things that are great, special, and unique about you without qualifying them. So without saying, I mean, it could be better, but I think I'm okay at this. Or, maybe I'm not as good as so-and-so, but maybe I'm good at this.
Not as good as I used to be 5 years ago.
Right. Any number of things. And so what's interesting about this exercise is, one, it can be surprisingly challenging to do. But take comfort in the fact that you're making this list not to show to anybody, right? You're not creating your dating profile or your resume and putting these on there, although maybe it's good practice for things you could put on those later. But it's just this list for yourself, and to kind of be aware of if you're writing something and you feel like a little bit weirdly uncomfortable while you're writing it, that might be an indication there's something there, and there actually might be a lot of truth to it. And that's kind of why you get that feeling of like, I feel weird to even say this, could actually be because it's so true.
So that was a preview of another show on the Pleasure Podcast Network called the Multiamory Podcast. And again, if you want to check out more from this series, look up Multiamory episode 394 called 50 Ways to Handle Jealousy. And then it's a 2-part series with episode 395. So look those up wherever you listen to podcasts, or go to multiamory.com. And the Multiamory hosts have also been on this podcast. So if you want to go check out the back catalog, we have an episode with Multiamory, and it's all about their book, which is a really great episode. And make sure you tune in to Multiamory every Tuesday, wherever you listen to podcasts. And of course, Private Parts Unknown comes out on Wednesday. So make sure you come back and check out an all new episode of Private Parts Unknown then. Love you, privates.